All right, well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us as we kick off our fall webinar series featuring our ADI hacks for investigations in the hybrid and virtual classroom. Today's webinar is ADI hack number 1, high quality synchronous discussions. This webinar will be recorded and posted on our website as well as our social media platforms for later viewing or sharing. If you haven't already, please follow us on Twitter, which you can see down there in the lower left-hand corner. Of the screen in order to interact with ADI and our community. My name is Leanne Gleim, and I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm the account executive here at ADI. So kind of before I hand it over to Carrie, let's review how you can interact with us throughout this webinar. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that Q&A icon down there. That's where you can submit your questions, and your question could be selected to be answered live at the end during the Q&A session. And if this is the case, I'll go ahead and mark that question answered live. We'll also be taking additional questions in a more informal setting as after we end this session. And of course, the chat function, which you all are already familiar with, allows you to chat with each other and us throughout this webinar. So as always, Carrie has a lot of great ideas to share, but don't worry. Again, this webinar will be recorded and posted to the website as well as emailed to webinar registrants. And any links that we share and the note page she's going to make available here live soon will be in the post-webinar email and with the recording as well. So with all that stuff behind us, I'm really excited to introduce you to your facilitator for today's webinar, Carrie Burt. Carrie is the PL specialist here at ADI, and as always, has put together some amazing things to share with you today. Over to you, Carrie.
Awesome. Thanks, Leanne. So we're going to go through quite a few tips and tricks to help create better synchronous discussions with students. But I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about the kinds of interactions that we're asking students to do as part of this virtual learning. Before we jump into that, we wanted to hear from, before we jump into that, we've got a notes page available here for you. If you want to click on that, it's a follow along that goes through everything that I'm going to say today. So you can get to that by typing bit.ly/ADI hack 1. And then Leanne has also just posted the link to that in the chat. It's going to ask you to make a copy, and then you'll have it and you can put notes in there if you'd like or not. But I thought that might be helpful in addition to the recording of the webinar to use that notes page. All right, so now we'll jump in. If you don't mind, in the chat, we know as teachers that whoever's doing the talking is doing the thinking, right? That's a very common phrase in teaching. So what we'd like to hear from you is, what are some things you're doing or you're hearing that your teachers are doing to encourage students to do more of the talking during synchronous meetings? So if you'll take a minute and type that in the chat, we'd love to hear your response on that before we jump in with some suggestions of our own. Colleen said she has them use breakout rooms. Awesome. Oh, a couple people.
I see polls, yeah, and community building questions from Tammy.
Jamboards, typing in the chat. That's a great idea. Giving them prompts, doing think, pair, shares out there. Chat responses and Jamboards, Pear Deck. Awesome. Great. Yeah, it looks like there's tons of ideas that we're going to kind of, Talania disguises the learning target and has them share what she thinks or what they think that they're supposed to be learning. That's a good idea. I think I said your name wrong. I'm so sorry. Okay, so lots and lots of great ideas, and that's kind of what we were thinking as well. The most common thing that's happening right now is that teachers and parents and the news, everybody's kind of wondering, is virtual learning going to be as effective as learning in a classroom? And what we want to kind of postulate is that that's not the important question. What we really want to think about, it's not the onlineness of the instruction that makes it effective or not, it's the kinds of interactions that we're asking students to use. So how we're getting them to interact with people and ideas and materials. And there are 4 levels to this. This comes out of some research by a group in 2009, so it's been around a while, but we think of this as happening on a continuum from passive to more interactive learning. And that passive instruction, that's going to be where students are just receiving information from you. So they are listening, and maybe they're, following along, but typically they're just listening to what the teacher is saying. Learning can happen there. They can watch a demo and learn something from it, but that's going to be the point. The next level is active, and that's going to be where students are then actively doing something. Probably you're telling them kind of a structure for what to do and how to do it, but they are actually participating in some kind of activity. So that might be creating a cell model, or the moon phase cookie thing. Even practice problems kind of fall into this category. The next level after that is constructive. And oftentimes this is where the ADI activities are going to fall. So this is going to be where students are actually having to figure things out for themselves, construct their own understanding. And the highest level is interactive learning. And that's going to be where students are actually not only creating their own understanding, but interacting with the ideas of others. As we move from level to level, we're going to see that students learn more. This isn't saying that passive learning is bad and interactive learning is good, and therefore you should only ever do interactive learning. There's a time and a place for all four of these, but we know that if we can get kids to construct their own knowledge and look at what other kids have done, then they're going to learn more than if they're just listening to us talk. So you get more if they're actually doing something, you get more if they're deciding what it is they're doing, and you get the most learning if they not only do that, but see what other kids have done. A lot of times when in the spring, when we jumped into online learning, a lot of what was happening was more passive instruction. That's the lowest hanging fruit for online instruction. And it's easy to do that, but I think it is, it's not going to get kids as far as we want them to go. The next thing is active learning. And this is, I think, where sometimes our conversations kind of get stuck, is more call and response kinds of things with our students. And so we want to make sure, we want to try, as we're working and thinking about student conversations, to find ways, even in discussions, to have them be constructing their own ideas and interacting with the ideas of others. And that's going to lay a framework for the tips and ideas that I'm putting in today. My next question for you is, what struggles are you having, or are you hearing that your teachers are having, with getting students to talk to each other? So what kinds of things are coming up? We've gotten quite a few emails about this, like, how do I help my kids talk to each other better? But we'd love to hear from you about what you're seeing and hearing. Any issues that are coming up for you? And distractions at home. You've got hybrid instruction, trying to make it work for both kids at the same time. Students are scared to talk. Yeah, it's hard to put your ideas out there, even face to face, much less when you're virtual. You get them into breakout rooms and they still don't talk. They won't turn on cameras. Total radio silence. Yeah, so that's kind of what we were hearing. Yeah, and there's some hesitation sometimes from teachers as well to stick kids in a breakout, because you can't be in there necessarily with them and you don't know what's going to be happening. You've got lots of screens going on. Okay, yeah, lots and lots of great things. So I kind of went through and came up with some common problems based on what I've been hearing. Students won't talk when the teacher asks a question, just like radio silence, like someone said. They don't stay on task when the teacher puts them in groups. The same few students are doing all of the talking. So you've got, Hermione with her hand up, but the virtual version of that. Some other issues that we're hearing are that it's very surface level. They're not really digging in and having a discussion. It's just like they answer the question and move on. That it's harder to hear from the at-home kids than it is from the in-class kids. And also that it's hard to monitor what's going on with the at-home kids when they have their cameras off. So other issues happen as well with this. There are other ideas that hopefully you'll see some answers for, but this is the framework from which I was creating these tips, and I hope that you're going to get a couple of ideas at least that you can use in your own classroom to raise the level of student conversation. So the first tip that I have is to make norms and then revise and review them often. So not just make some norms like at the beginning of the year in my own classroom, I taught elementary, and then I taught middle school science. And in my own classroom, we always did the thing at the beginning of the year where we made the norms, everybody signed them at the bottom, and then we pretty much never talked about them again, except when someone was in trouble. And then that was, they'd look at the norm sheet because I told them to. Instead of that, what we want to do is find norms that are actually really meaningful for students and have them, not only create them, but have this be a living, breathing document that they get to revise and edit and fix and add as they go. So we've got some expectations for e-learning. This little poster, we've made it cuter, and you can get that. But what you want is norms around things like group collaboration. What does it look like when you are working together well with your teammates? What does that sound like? What does that look like? Discussion and chat. What is the expectation when you are put into a breakout room? What are you supposed to talk about? What happens if you finish early? What happens if someone gets off task? This is all stuff that I didn't really think about when I, like in a non-virtual classroom. It's stuff that's still really important, but I feel like it's very important in a virtual setting to have specific norms and specific expectations and have those written out for kids. And the last one is how do you critique? If you're asked to give someone feedback, how do we do that in a way that makes sense? And there are tons and tons of ideas for norms out there. I just think making sure with the ADI process, especially, that you have norms around these particular topics is going to be important. Once you get those norms, then there are some ways that you can reinforce it and keep it kind of light and fun. It doesn't need to be a very serious conversation every time. So have the kids act out examples and non-examples. Put up a norm like how you could give feedback, critique that is respectful, and then have them give school appropriate examples and non-examples. Another is to give them some scenarios they can critique, or even give them a chance every once in a while to write you a reflection about what the norms are and anything that's happened to them on a particular day that they wish there was a rule about or a norm about. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples around this scenario thing. Here's kind of what I was thinking for that. This could be a warm-up for your classroom one day when they come in. This could be the question. In a 5-minute breakout room, one student's talking for 3.5 minutes, one's talking for 30 seconds, one's talking for a minute, and one of them didn't talk at all. And then the prompt for that day would be, were any of our norms for our class broken? And is this a situation that we would need to add some norms to help? Probably this is happening in the breakout rooms. Probably this is going to seem pretty familiar to the kids, but making it not be something where it's tied back to their direct experience and forcing them to think like, oh, I'm going to tattle on my friend because they were hogging the conversation, and just keeping it generic is going to push them into being a little more open, hopefully. Another example that you could put up in front of them is that a teacher put her students in a breakout room with a task. In one room, the kids talked a little bit about what they were supposed to do, jumped in, finished early, and started talking about TikTok. And you could ask, are any of our norms broken? Is this something we should add norms to help? And that's kind of a, maybe that's going to be up to you and your students on whether that's okay or not, on how they use that time. But just having conversations where you're constantly cycling in is going to lay the foundation and the framework so that students know that you are taking this seriously and that it's something to help them, not rules that you put in place because you love rules. There you go. All right, the next tip is to structure discussions mindfully. A typical classroom discussion, there's a model that a lot of conversations with teachers and students follows, and it goes something like this. The teacher will ask, why did this happen? And one kid will raise their hand and say, oh, I think it happened because blah, blah. And if the answer is right, the teacher will be like, yep, good job. And if the answer is wrong, the teacher's going to be like, oh, that was pretty close, but who wants to see if they can answer that with them, help them out or whatever. What that's called is an IRE pattern. So what you're looking at there is an initiating move by the teacher. They ask a question, a student responds, and then the teacher comes in and evaluates that response and decides if it's good or not. That kind of discussion is prevalent in every subject, in every grade level. That is how school has been done for a long time. But it's hard in a virtual setting, especially. It's not great I mean, it's hard to get discussions going when that's the pattern, even in face-to-face, but in online classes, if they're waiting on you to tell them if they're right or wrong, it's going to be harder to get a real back and forth discussion going between kids. And that's the goal. If we want to push them into interactive learning where they're having to think about what other people have done, it's going to be easier if we can change the structure of the questions so that this isn't the model that's being followed. So a couple of ideas here: virtual Socratic seminars where students are asking and leading the conversations. Those take a lot of time to set up, but they are really valuable if you can get them going, especially in stages like the stage 5 debrief. The next thing is making sure the conversations are purposeful and based on a shared experience. So not just being like, you kind of have to use your discussion powers for good, right? You can't just ask them to talk about things. It needs to be based on something that they've done, and it needs to have a prompt and really ask them to dig in on something they understand, because talking online is scary for adults. It's hard to put your own ideas out there, and it's especially scary for kids when they don't know how other people are going to judge that response. So if it can be a conversation around something that they know pretty well, they're going to be more likely to talk. Other ideas: letting students vote on responses to determine their validity, and then asking students to defend the vote. So if someone does respond to a question, or maybe you put out a potential response and have them, give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a sideways thumb on how much they agree, and ask, why did you choose that, and put them in a breakout room and let them talk about that. That's going to maybe spark a little bit of conversation because they've already voted and now they just have to say why. And the last one is to use something like the teacher question cards to ensure that you aren't holding all of the knowledge, so that it's not that IRE pattern. I love these little cards. I just made it a little bigger here so you can see it. They're based around questions that you can ask to keep a conversation going. And there's 4 different cards. So instead of responding by saying, oh yeah, that was pretty good, or can someone help them out, you can take yourself out of it and say, does anyone want to add something? Do you guys agree with all of what they just said, or part of what they just said? What part would anybody like to share a different idea? What do we do now? There's tons of good questions in here. And so you can just have this set of little cards laid out on your desk in front of your computer. And when a kid asks a question or gives a response, glance down real fast, look at a category, and pick a question that continues the conversation and puts it back on them to keep going. I found in my own class, before I used these little cards, that I fell into the IRE pattern a lot, but this was a good reminder for myself and a good kind of trainer for myself to get better at questioning strategies. The next tip that I have for you is to require artifacts of student discussion. So when you put them in a breakout room, this isn't exactly an IRE and side by side comparison, but what we suggest is give them some kind of prompt, have them do a small group discussion about it, and while they're working in that small group, have them create something. So don't just ask them to go talk in the small group. That's going to be tough to monitor. It's hard to get around to all the groups, and also it's going to be easier for them to be off task. If they know they've got a particular amount of time to do a thing, then they're going to be more likely to be on task in those breakouts and have better conversations. There are some stages that work really well for this. Really, all the stages work pretty well for getting students to talk to each other, but that stage 1, identifying the task where they're doing the reading, the stage 5 where they're doing the explicit and reflective discussion, and then the argumentation session where they are looking at each other's work. Those are going to be places where it's really easy to build in some kind of artifact for them to work on. So when they're doing the reading, one option is to have them do the lucid chart, like a concept map for their ideas about what they know and what they need to figure out. And each kid could have a column, or there are tons of ways to set this up, but it's just a collaborative concept mapping activity. You could also have them collaboratively annotate. So you could have them do something like Kami. There are other great programs out there. You could even copy, the text and put it in a PowerPoint slide deck, and they could go off of that. But having them annotate together is a great artifact, and you can quickly scan through and see, okay, they've done what they needed to do basically, or, ooh, they need to, they haven't been working in this group because nothing has been done. For the argumentation session, I really like to use a Jamboard for that when they're doing this collaboratively. There are other ways as well to do it asynchronously, but if you're going to do it synchronously, putting them into groups and using a digital equivalent of the sticky notes that we have for student feedback, having them write comments, but have them write them together. So with their partner in the breakout room or with their group in the breakout room, collaborate together on the sticky notes that they're giving. That gives them a purpose to the activity, to the conversation, and will hopefully lead to them talking more because they have to kind of discuss what they're going to put down. Just a couple more ideas for stage 5 to get that done. Padlet's great. You can take the slides that you would have done for the stage 5 discussion and make them columns. So you could have a column for each of the slides that you would have used in a face-to-face classroom, and then put the kids in groups and have them come up with the responses with their team about the answers to those questions, and they can go in and comment on other teams. You can sit then in Padlet and watch things pop up live and know if they are working and what kinds of conversations they're having, what level of conversation. And one last one is Nearpod. There's also Pear Deck. These are pretty similar programs where you can have them do something and everybody has individual accountability, and then put them into a breakout room after they've answered a question and have them discuss what they put and why. So give them a minute to process individually and then follow that with the discussion. And that's going to hopefully lead to them feeling more confident because they've had a chance to think it through. My fourth tip here is to give kids sentence starters and questions. I think in almost every platform people are using, there's a way to message kids. So when you're in a classroom, we've got these Talk Moves table tents, and they have different questions that students can ask of each other. You could come up with a way to have them have a document like this maybe, or even just take the questions off of the table tent and message them out. So you could push them out to the breakout rooms or push them out even to individual students and say, hey, why don't you ask your group this? Or give each kid a question and say, sometime during this breakout room, I want you to find a place that's natural and ask this question. That can be a good way to train them because they don't know what to say, right? Obviously, if they're not talking, it's not just because they're stubborn or whatever, it's because they don't know what to say. So if we can give them question stems, that's going to help frame that conversation. Same thing with our back pocket questions. You can message kids the back pocket question like when they're doing the argumentation session, and then they can ask those same questions even though you're not there to hand them a card, and it works pretty similarly. Just a couple more tips here. So tip 5 is to explicitly include the at-home kids. One idea is to number all of your students in alphabetical order and then randomize who you call on. I know some teachers who are struggling to, when they're in the middle of the face-to-face classroom and there's kids all over, sometimes forget to check in on those online kids. So that can be a really simple way, is just put everybody in alphabetical order, whether they're with you in class or at home, and then make sure you're calling on, using your whatever method you like to use, call on everyone. You may also want to schedule or give someone in class a job to monitor that at-home group and monitor the chat, and then ask you questions and be the at-home representative in your classroom. And then another idea is to group up the in-school students with the at-home students. So instead of having breakout rooms where the students are all the at-home kids are working together and all the in-school students are working together, have it be a thing where you've got 2 kids in the classroom and 2 kids at home paired up together, and then they can keep that conversation going, but kind of, not have to feel like it's 2 separate groups. Keep the continuity of your classroom together. Next tip is to use some cooperative learning structures. Nonverbal signals. Zoom has some nonverbal signals built into the chat. If you're using Google whatever, there's a way to build in, you can scroll through and find pretty much every emoji that's on a phone. And so you can have them vote. There's thumbs up and thumbs down in there, along with a whole bunch of other things. You can also use breakout rooms for think, pair, share. So ask a question with a prompt in the main session, and then put them in a breakout room with just one other partner and have them talk about it, and come back to the main group to share out. And when they come back to the main group, sometimes an idea to get kids to talk is, instead of asking them what they think, ask them to share something that someone else said that was smart. So instead of them having to put themselves out there and be vulnerable, they can, you know, brag, but also throw somebody else under the bus and be like, this is what this other person said. And I think that builds a little bit of safety and community, and gets it where it's not such a big scary thing to talk, because you're not saying your idea, you're just bragging on someone else. My last tip for this is to use some formative assessments to track the progress of the students. This link is in that notes page that we put at the beginning. So you can have students, you can put kids' names into this list and then keep track, check if they did the thing that you asked them to do and if they talked when you were listening. In a face-to-face classroom, it's hard enough to keep track of that kind of thing, right? Like it's hard enough to remember from class period to class period who was dominating the conversation, who didn't talk at all. But in a virtual setting, it's even more stressful. And if you're in a hybrid where you've got some kids at school and some kids at home, that can be incredibly stressful. So just having a little tracker sheet can be a really easy way. You can make these columns whatever you want, but to look at it over time, look for trends, and just check on your students, see how they're doing. And then if someone's never contributing, you could have a special meeting with them or send them an email and just ask if there's anything you can do to help. And the last resource that we have for you is this exit ticket that's also in the notes page, which Leanne just put into the chat. And this is for the kids at the end of the day to self-reflect. It doesn't need to be a big thing. It doesn't have to have all of these questions or these questions in particular. But I think that if you're asking kids every single day, hey, did you encourage your classmates to share their ideas today? After a week or two of clicking no every single time, hopefully at least some of them are going to be like, man, I should probably do that so that I can, not check no for once in my life. And then maybe they'll kind of do it and they can move up the levels. So again, this could be a Google form or however you want to do it. It doesn't have to be something crazy, but that's kind of my ideas. If you're constantly checking in on them, having them self-reflect, then hopefully they're going to self-correct as well. All right, so that is all of the tips I have. So we went through the levels of interaction and some tips and tricks for having good student conversations. We're going to jump now into the open Q&A session, and I'm going to turn it over to Leanne for just a minute.
Awesome, Carrie. Thank you so much as always. Just a reminder, if you do have a question, please submit it to Q&A. And I just saw Kaylee's pop up there. So I'm going to go through sharing a few of our resources that we've got available kind of before we get to the live Q&A session. One of the first things that I want to share is we have so many free resources, and a lot of them are the amazing brainchild of Carrie and the rest of our PL specialist team here. And so the first thing are our downloadable materials, including scaffolds, and of course our distance learning section, which I highly recommend if you're working in a hybrid or virtual classroom. We also have support videos that you can view, which are great for overviews of ADI stages, including ADI in action and teaching with ADI. Also for free resources, we have our upcoming webinars. As you know, you can view any of the past recordings, including some of our supports for ADI at a distance there in this recording as well, including our full series of upcoming webinars. Please save the date for our next webinar, which is another of our highly requested webinars, which is Safe Face-to-Face Materials Management as students come back. What in the world do labs look like with COVID protocols in place? And that's next week on October 8th. And so please save the date for that. We do have an amazing newsletter that comes out bi-weekly. If you've not subscribed, please do so. You can do it in the bottom banner of any of our website pages. Please join that to stay in the loop on some of our upcoming events, as well as we love to highlight teachers and the amazing things that they're doing. And it's just a great resource for information. To support you, we also have a Facebook group. You can join us there, as well as on Twitter, to find other educators around the country who are working on ADI. And we certainly hope you'll join us in the conversation there. I tried to kind of live tweet the webinar because Carrie had so many ideas, but like you flipped the slides a little quick. So
sorry.
Please, no, it's okay. It was totally my fault. Every time a good one came up, I'm like, ooh. But I digress. So if you would like, one of our newest supports kind of grew from the amazing free resources that Carrie and the PL team put together. And it's been a project of ours in the works for a while. We now have our ADI online platform powered by Eduflow. And we're excited to be able to offer this one-stop shop to help teachers implement ADI in virtual, face-to-face, and hybrid learning environments. Our ADI online webpage is a great resource to reference or share if you're interested in learning more about this platform. And at the bottom of the page, you can also view or download our elementary or secondary flyer with investigation topics and pricing. If you have any questions, you can email us at the letter PL, at argumentdriveninquiry.com. So please check that out as well. And then if you're interested in learning more about the ADI instructional model, we have a variety of things whenever you get the bandwidth to consider some professional learning options. One of our most popular is our self-paced asynchronous PL option, and we've got intro to ADI for elementary, secondary, as well as next steps to ADI available. If you prefer to interact with folks and kind of be in more of a live virtual setting, we do have virtual synchronous PL options that would be great for you. And we would invite you to join us. Our next one is Saturday, December 5th for secondary introduction to ADI. And we'll be announcing the rest of our winter 2021 virtual workshop dates soon. And finally, we're excited to share our next Train the Trainer is going to be virtual this spring. It's our most cost-effective offer to join the ADI Trainer family and includes everything you need to facilitate highly professional workshops, ADI workshops in your school or district. And we hope you'll be able to join us March 2nd through 4th, 2020 for 3 days of collaboration and preparation to share ADI. And of course, as always, more info will be coming soon on our website for that as well. So with that said, let's get to Q&A. And one of the first ones we have, Carrie, is from Ruth. And Ruth wants to know, how often should I change up small groups?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so that I've heard people say that one of the ways that they're helping their students feel comfortable talking is by actually keeping the groups similar for a long time. So I don't know that I could give you like a specific number, but I would think for at least a couple weeks at a time, they would always be with that one group, and you'd be monitoring, checking, making sure that if anybody's, you know, there's personality differences or whatever, that you're helping with that. But I think that's going to be a way to make them feel connected in this, you know, very disconnected time, especially your at home kids. So I would say if you can, keep them in the same groups. And I would also say that a lot of times what I've been finding is that the smaller groups tend to work better. So putting kids into groups of 4 in a face-to-face works really well. Like you have table groups of 4, right? That's ideal. But in an online learning setting, I almost think that groups of 3 works a little better, and tends to lead to really good active conversations. If you have 4, sometimes one of the students will feel comfortable enough to kind of drop out of the conversation. So that would be my suggestion, is keep them in those groups for a while and just be monitoring and talking and listening about how it's going.
Awesome. Sorry, I was busy typing in chat and some other things. And then Levi was also asking, kind of expanding upon what several people posted. So he loves using breakout rooms, but when he puts his students in groups of 3 to 4, he ends up having 11 different groups to get to during the synchronous meeting time, and it's really tough. What suggestions do you have for managing and holding groups accountable in that setting?
Yeah, so I think that goes back to kind of what I was saying earlier. I don't know that I could even recommend that you try to get to every single group every day. You're going to be flying through them and barely able to help, right? So having a system in place where students can flag you if they need you is going to be really helpful, I think, so that you're there just in time, and able to step in and answer questions and that sort of thing. I don't know if that's some kind of, they chat you or you have another system set up, but I think that would be really helpful. And then I think that's also the main reason that I suggested having some kind of deliverable for the students to do when they're in those breakout rooms, so that they're really actually actively having to do something and you can monitor the something instead of trying to get in and hear every single conversation. And I guess my last piece of advice around that would be to keep those breakout rooms shorter than they need to be. So in a face-to-face classroom, I'll talk a lot about, like, giving them slightly less time than they need, and then being able to benevolently gift them a few extra minutes. If you give them a little too little time to do whatever the task is, then they're going to feel a sense of urgency. If you're like, hey, you have 10 minutes to do this, and they're like, that's going to take me 2 minutes, then we'll be like, hi, wait, I'll wait, we'll talk about whatever. And then they run out of time. So that way they get, the focus comes from that time limitation.
I love that. That is all the questions that we have. Thank you, Carrie, for some amazing ideas, and thank you all for spending a little bit of your amazingly precious time. We know you all have a lot on your plate with us today. Again, this webinar will be recorded and sent out with all of the links discussed, so please feel free to share. If you find something that really resonates you, feel free to tweet at us at Argument Driven. We love kind of seeing little glimpses at what's going on and some of the amazing ideas that teachers come up with. Carrie, any last words before we sign off here?
No, thanks. You guys are an awesome group to hang out with this afternoon. If you have any questions, just let us know. We're here to help. So thanks.
Yeah, and we'll hang out here for a minute or two as always. Thank you all. Carrie, are you still here for a second?
Yep.
Can you hear me? We have a question. How is ADI different to modeling instruction? And I was going to send a quick answer, and I was like, if Carrie is still here, she can answer it better than I can. Do you have a few sentences on that?
Yeah, so I think ADI can fit into modeling instruction in the large traditional sense of what modeling instruction is. So you've got in more traditional modeling instruction, you have them come up with an initial model, and then they do some activities, refine the model, do some activities, refine the model. So I think ADI can fit in as an activity that helps them to refine the model. That said, there are also ADI sessions or ADI investigations specifically built around modeling. So there are some ADI investigations like moon phases and I'm not gonna be able to think of the hurricane one, and I don't know, there's quite a few, especially in that Earth and Space Science book, I think, that have modeling built into them. So that can be, it can fit into a larger modeling lesson cycle. And then there is some modeling within the investigations themselves. I hope that answers that. Feel free to put in the chat if you need more.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of posted our emails there as well. And Michelle just asked if she can get a certificate for attending the webinar. Do we do those upon request still, Carrie?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, okay. Just Michelle, just email info@argumentdriveninquiry.com, and then we'll get you that certificate. No big deal. Georgina, you asked about pursuing ADI further. I would say you've got two kind of great options. Either of those course types, whatever works better for you, the asynchronous course or the synchronous course that's coming up on December 5th. Those are going to be your best bets for kind of jumping in and getting the information. We've got books with investigations in them and that sort of thing as well. So that can be another way to kind of get your feet wet. But I would say if you prefer asynchronous learning, that would be a great way to kind of get in, and then you can kind of build in. And Leanne just put an email in. If you want to send her an email, that would be she'll get you some more information.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carrie presents on a lot of those online courses and does an amazing job. Also has a very soothing voice, which we've received several comments on.
Several comments. I don't know what that. I feel like I need to pursue a career in NPR or something.
you now have a resume builder there. Yeah. So Julius wants to know, it says, I was never told how to do the breakout sessions. All of the PD sessions were full. Do you have any info on how I can create these? So any basic recommendations for creating breakout sessions for Julius?
Yeah, it really depends on which program you're using. So if you're using Zoom, you'll just need to make sure that you've got the breakout room settings turned on. And if you want to email that you have Google Meets. Okay, so Google Meets is working on a breakout room system right now, but they haven't put it out yet except for a few districts that are piloting it for them, but it will be coming soon. So the workaround, if you're using Google Meets, is to pre-create a whole bunch of rooms and then provide students with the link for the Google Meet that they're going to need to go into for their group. So you'd have one main room where everybody joins, and then you would have maybe a hyperdoc with, you know, group A is going to be first period, group A is going to go into this room and put the link there. First period, group B is going to go into this room. And so they can click to those breakout rooms that way. But
Awesome.
hopefully they're going to soon have a way for you to just do it really straightforwardly. That's the hopefully temporary workaround.
Yeah, I think they're working to get that on as quickly as they can. I think that's all the questions that I see in chat. If nobody has anything else.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and log off. Well, thank you so much, everyone, and good luck. Hope we'll be able to join us next week for the lab equipment safety webinar. So we'll keep doing these ADI hacks this whole semester. So we're excited about this series.
Awesome. See you all next week.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks.